This is the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack, engaging leaders from the pharma universe. Hello and welcome to the Pharmaverse podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack. If you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry, you've come to the right place because we interview the brightest stars, the best leaders from all corners of the Pharmaverse, and today's guest certainly fits that description. We're joined by the CEO of OS Therapies, Paul Romness. Paul, welcome to the Pharmaverse.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Yes, I'm really excited for our listeners to not only learn your story, but also the story of OS Therapies and how those stories converge. So let's start with OS Therapies, that story. What's behind the company name?
Sure. So when we started the company was started around my daughter's best friend, Olivia. Her last name doesn't end in an S, so it's not OS for that. But she was diagnosed in February of 2017 with Osteosarcoma, which is pretty rare in kids. It's about 1,000 cases a year in the United States, but it's very common in dogs. It's the highest killer of canines in the world by disease. Obviously, automobiles are the number one killer of dogs. But when we started the company, all we had was the indication of osteosarcoma for our HER2 platform. But as we built the company and we built the platform, there were other indications that we added. We added all the canine indications for the HER2 platform, but we also added all the other solid tumors that, are HER2 expressing. And so now that OS really stands for overall survival, which, as you know, Michael, is the barrier to entry for approval at the FDA.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love the whole Olivia story and the OS therapies. Tell us more about Olivia. She was a friend of your daughter's, right?
Yeah, and I can actually see her house from our house. Her parents, we all have traveled together, and she and my daughter graduated from UVA last May. She has taken her MCATs, and she'll be certainly going to med school next year because her MCATs were so good. And she's doing great. I always tell the end of the story because a lot of kids don't. She's 7 years cancer-free. But we really wanted an option in case the osteosarcoma came back to the lungs and the brain, which happens in all solid tumors. If it metastasizes to the lungs and the brain in all solid tumors. And that's where your survival rate drops precipitously.
Now, you mentioned that you've bolstered your pipeline. And before we start talking about the ADC platform, tell us, the osteosarcoma technology, how exactly does it work?
So the HER2 technology that we just finished our phase 2B clinical trial in osteosarcoma, and we believe to be a registration trial, we'll be pulling that data together and should be together around Thanksgiving for submission into the FDA for not only breakthrough designation, but for conditional approval. Is what we're doing is we're giving the body attenuated or weakened listeria that has a HER2 vector attached to it. And the body identifies listeria in a 5-alarm fire of immune response. So your flu vaccine is 2 immune responses. This is 11, 12, 13 immune responses. And the body recognizes the listeria within an hour 1, we have an immune response. At hour 4, we shut down the listeria with an antibiotic, but the immune response keeps kicking. The body says, oh, listeria, hey, lymph nodes, start generating some T cells. Those T cells go out and identify little micrometastases that have survived the chemo and radiation from some of these kids have had. And it identifies those little micrometastases, and they do hand-to-hand combat, and it's really amazing. Herceptin kind of holds down cancer. This is killing the cancer cells. And so we also see this as an opportunity to partner, co-treat with Herceptin or trastuzumab to not only prevent resistance that gets built up by patients with Herceptin, but also to help Herceptin work better, trastuzumab work better.
That's really cool. Thanks for explaining that to someone who's not a scientist by training.
Oh, come on.
But and you mentioned that you guys hit a really great milestone, patient 41, and we all look forward to that data coming out. Yeah. But impressively, you've also had some nonprofits that have been interested in your company. How many are there now?
There are 7 nonprofits that have invested in OS Therapies. We took it after the Vertex cystic fibrosis foundation model, in which CFF invested $150 million into Vertex. Obviously, we're talking much smaller numbers here, Michael, but and there were no treatments for cystic fibrosis, just like there have been no treatments for osteosarcoma in over 40 years, certainly in metastasized osteosarcoma, in either dogs or humans. But not only was Vertex successful in developing a therapy for CFF, but the CFF sold their royalty stream for either $4.3 or $5.3 billion with a B. And, the nonprofits, let's say we weren't successful in our clinical trial, and we can talk about that a little more, but I think we have been successful in our clinical trials so far. But even if we weren't, the mission of these nonprofits would still be met in that they are advancing research. But if there's financial advantage and we commercialize the product, and as you know, if you don't commercialize a product, it never gets to the patient. But if we commercialize a product and they get financial benefit, not only have they helped create a treatment, but they can now use that money to work towards cures and prevention. And so we're always looking for additional nonprofits to join us. I'm talking to one later this afternoon, actually.
I mean, it's like you mentioned, it's not only a treatment for humans, but also for canines. And so it kind of, especially pediatric patients and canines, like the two things that pull at our heartstrings the most, right?
Well, and this is, it usually happens in teenagers. It's slightly more in boys than in girls. It's the same incidence rate no matter where you are in the world. There are 19,000 patients in addition to the 1,000 patients in the United States. And for that, we're looking for a global partner. We're fully looking to commercialize in the U.S. ourselves, just because there's a concentrated patients. We've just finished our clinical trial at 21 sites. The principal investigators there are really the KOLs in this specialty in osteosarcoma. And so they're very familiar with treating with our therapy. And so we see commercialization in the United States, but we definitely see out-licensing, looking for a global partner for humans, but also looking for a global partner, including the U.S., for the canines, because we really don't want that to distract us from our primary mission.
I mean, it sounds like a great partnership opportunity for a big pharma out there. And of course, we're rooting for OS Therapies, especially in the osteosarcoma space, because of patients like Olivia. But this is sort of full circle for you, right? Weren't you telling me that you kind of started off in that osteosarcoma space in your career?
Yeah, I started out carrying a bag for Johnson & Johnson, selling orthopedic implants at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., which was the global osteosarcoma center for the entire military. And so my exposure was very early on in limb sparing, where instead of resecting the entire leg, you'd replace the joint for which the osteosarcoma infested itself. It's usually in the long bones, the distal femur, proximal tibia, and proximal humerus. A lot of times they would replace those joints with implants. And so I thought it was common and curable, and it is neither. It's not very common, and it's very deadly. And so that's really become the mission of not just me, but our entire team. The passion, the culture is focused on, if we can be successful in this small, rare pediatric cancer, possibly getting rid of chemotherapy for this subpopulation. What if we can do that with the larger population of other tumors like breast cancer, colorectal cancer, other places with significant unmet medical need, which is another goal of ours.
We're going to touch on a lot of things you just commented on, but first, I got to talk about these ADCs that you guys have. Tell us a little bit about these. These are really intriguing.
Well, as you know, the ADC space is really hot. Our special sauce, our IP, is the beauty of taking silicone and silicone dioxide and wrapping the payload of the ADC. As you know, ADC is basically a cruise missile with cluster bombs attached to it. And it's really hot in the biotech space right now, and I know that your audience understands this. But what we do is wrap up the payload with silicone, and it can be anything. It can be a cytotoxin, can be a monoclonal antibody, could be a mRNA. And we attach those payloads, multiple payloads, 3, 6, 9, 12 payloads in stoichiometric design, to the ADC with the silicone. The beauty of silicone, and you know it from industrial uses, but the beauty of silicone is it doesn't get broken down by protein, which is, one of that and oxygen are the two things that really break things down as you're going through the body. And so that silicone maintains its structure through the body. The ADC gets it directed to the cancer environment. The beauty of the cancer environment is silicone does get broken down by low pH or acidity, high acidity. And we can dial in those pH levels for which that silicone will dissolve. And so the ADC gets in and around the cancer environment. The cancer environment is highly acidic, low pH, eats away at the linkers, drops the payload, eats away at the covering, and the payload becomes active. More important with cytotoxins just because of the side effects as it's traveling through the body, but certainly protecting payloads till they get to the delivery systems is important. And then, as you know, the linkers in ADCs are the weak link.
That's right. And, going to your website and looking at the pipeline, you call them tuning ADCs because you were saying that you can ratchet it up or down based on the pH of the patient. Is that true?
Yep, and we can change the targeting ligand. We're starting with folate receptor alpha. We're looking at ovarian cancer with multiple payloads. The more important thing for your audience here is they like life cycle management and the importance of keeping the pipeline nice and long and healthy. By wrapping a payload with silicone, we have changed the chemical entity. So we do have the IP for exotican, which is a Daiichi Sankyo product, but we've racked it with silicone, and we have the IP for that. And so any chemical entity that we would wrap with our silicone dioxide becomes a new chemical entity.
Fascinating. And I know that these ADCs and your IP is on a lot of people's radar. This episode is brought to you by K. Bassman International, the leader in pharma and biotech recruiting. When pharma executives need to make critical hires, they go to the experts at K. Bassman, pharma's one-source staffing solution. Visit kbic.com. Now back to the episode. I was just reading you guys got invited to J Labs, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Tell us more about that. What has that been like?
Sure. It's interesting. As we mentioned earlier, I started J&J, and I'm a little later in my career. Startups are no country for old men, but J&J has these J Labs around the world, and full disclosure, we applied to join J Labs a couple years ago in DC, which is focused on pediatrics. And we were much further along in our HER2 development. We were starting our phase 2 trial. We're now finishing that trial. And frankly, they weren't interested, and that's fine. We can do it on our own. But we were introduced to J Labs in Lower Manhattan, and they were very interested in our ADCs. And they don't invite you into J Labs unless they're interested in your technology. Yeah. So, interestingly, the last question they asked was to see our IP. So it's a pretty serious question.
Yeah, that is great. Well, congratulations to you guys. Hopefully it continues to go well. Wanted to dive into your career a little bit because, of course, this is a leadership podcast. I want to talk about your career and your leadership expertise. Going all the way back to your J&J days, and then as you progressed, you worked a lot in government affairs. How did that experience prepare you to be a CEO?
Well, as I say, I'd rather do something easy like solve some pediatric cancers than deal with politicians. But it is definitely full circle. This is a leadership podcast, and I was lucky enough to have some great leaders as my bosses and mentors. A couple bad ones, and you learn a lot from the bad ones too. But some mentors who really encouraged me to advance my educational career with a master's of health policy. And from J&J, where I was running government accounts, VAs, and military hospitals, really wanted to get into the policy work, and knowing that the macro affects the micro significantly, and making sure that reimbursement and just making sure that products get to patients. And I think we'll talk about the focus of great leadership, but I think J&J's credo is a great example. It starts with the patients. That's what our first decision is always about. But making sure that the patient gets the drugs, gets the commercialized product is critical. These brainiac institutions can do great things, but until they get the product to the patient, it's not doing any good. So from a macro standpoint, wanted to get into that. Went from Johnson & Johnson to Amgen, who really the pioneers in biotechnology, was very involved in business development, but also expanding facilities, was involved in the negotiations for the largest biotech facility in the world at that time in Puerto Rico, $1.3 billion. Got about $143 million in tax and non-tax incentives. Then ended up at Boehringer Ingelheim running their government affairs and public policy, had a great team, really focused. And then, things change and you get different opportunities, and Olivia ended up getting sick. And so we had tried to start a company between a couple friends of mine at Boehringer Ingelheim and J&J and a couple of friends of mine at MedImmune. And we had an idea of taking stuff off the shelf from Big Pharma. And, sometimes a $500 million indication is not worth picking up off the ground for Big Pharma. But $500 million for OS Therapies would be great because we've only spent about $25 million so far. And we'll be able to get to market with under $100 million. So, there are efficiencies in scale, and we see that. But unfortunately, Olivia got sick. Luckily, she's never metastasized. But through this journey, and we started a nonprofit before this, I've met a lot of a lot of parents who've lost their children. And that's a motivation to me.
Unthinkable. Well, again, we're wishing you all the success in the world with that endeavor. And it's really cool to see your career come full circle, and every step of the way you're progressing towards this one moment in time. And I'm glad that you mentioned your mentors too, because nobody gets to CEO by themselves, No. But in the pre-show discussion, of course, I asked you, what are the keys to leadership? And you quickly said culture, hiring, and networking. So I wanted just to take each of those and talk more about them. Like, what do you think is the key to creating great culture?
Well, back to the mission, right, which is patients first. And if that's your motivator, and the J&J credo, patients, caregivers, community, shareholders, in that order. And if you stick to that, and I think that helps set the culture. We're very efficient. There are only about 6 employees. We do everything else rented, not bought. So we have a lot of vendors. We're very efficient in how we spend our money. We're very efficient in how quickly we make decisions. It was a company we're talking to about out-licensing the human osteosarcoma indication to that said, hey, you guys know how to run clinical trials. And we do. Just because we're so efficient, we make decisions quickly, and we get the patients enrolled, and we pick the right locations. The 21 facilities that we have our clinical trial being completed at right now through the Children's Oncology Group are the top facilities in the country, from UPMC to Memorial Sloan Kettering to St. Jude's, just great children's hospitals across the country. So it's definitely about the people and the mission, and I think the culture is set by the mission and the people that are involved and the passion that they have.
I agree with you. That's wonderfully said. And now that I'm thinking about the 3 things, culture, hiring, networking, they kind of are stepwise leads right to culture. Like, for instance, the culture is set, but you got to hire the right people to do that. What do you think are some of the keys to hiring the right people? Is it all about aligning the mission? So
I've always had a much more diligent and more passionate, much more thoughtful approach to hiring than firing. Hiring usually is going to take away 2 years of someone's life, and if they're not in the right position, you're wasting 2 years of their life. They also have to be as passionate, and I'll give you some examples of some of the folks on our team now. And people that you end up having to fire are probably in the wrong position, and you're doing them a favor in the long run. That's certainly how I've looked at downturns for me, and you make the best of that, and you learn from it, and you move forward. But the people that we hire, hiring my chief medical and scientific officer, I met him across the table from our licensor in December of 2018, and I saw that he was as passionate about this, and particularly about the dogs, canines. Yeah. He showed me a video of a German Shepherd that had micrometastases all over his lungs, and the dog was treated, and the dog's running down the alley at University of Pennsylvania where the trial was done, and the dog ended up dying of old age. Osteosarcoma in a 1 year has almost 100% death rate in canines. Wow. So if we can change that, that'd be great too, right? Who doesn't love their dog? A home without a dog's just a house, right, Michael?
That's right. Yeah, we just got a puppy, so that's exactly true. And,
but my chief business officer, I met him 5 years ago on Wall Street, and he and I signed an advisory agreement 5 years ago. He didn't even remember that he had 30,000 shares coming to him from that advisory agreement until I reached out to him last year when we started thinking about going public. And he has the focus and the knowledge about Wall Street that I'll never get up to his speed, but I'm trying to. But having him on the team and having his passion for cancer and for treatments that can really change patients' lives. His father was just diagnosed with cancer. So, that kind of passion that we all have on the team, every single one of us has that type of passion for patients.
That's great. And you've already mentioned some of the people on your team. It's all through networking. And you said the power of your network is really critical. Can you speak more about how you feel like networking is crucial to building a company?
Well, so we might have talked about this before, but the only thing I know about getting old that's good is watching your network, watching your friends do well. And so, a lot of the people that I grew up in the industry are running pharmaceutical companies or running oncology divisions, or they were the cream of the crop when I was with them 25 years ago. I knew that they were these sharp people, and it's just been so fun to watch their careers blossom. And when we are looking for a new board member, or when we are looking for a new head of ADC, tapping into that network is very easy. Love LinkedIn, by the way. But it's really easy to tap into your network to find the right people, because you're starting with people that have the same passion and same focus as you.
Right. I want to end with one question. Many of the leaders that I've interviewed on this podcast have taken some sort of big risk that catapult them either, up an org chart, or sometimes it's an entrepreneurial risk. Now, I read that you cashed out your retirement to start OS Therapies. One, is that true? And two, what impelled you to do that?
Well, this is my life's work, Michael. Just remove or to improve the survival rate of a small pediatric cancer would be a life check for me. But just think if we extrapolate that out beyond osteosarcoma to other solid tumors, just the impact that we could have, either removing or making chemotherapy much more tolerable with the ADC delivery system. But I never said that. That was the one inaccurate article. Part of that article said that I said that I cashed out my retirement. It was my chief medical officer that ratted me out. But cashed in my retirement, cashed in my kids' college fund. They in turn have shares in the company, which is only fair. I knew that this was something that we had to make every effort for, and I thought, pushing the boat off the dock made sure that we kept going forward with our mission.
Touching and very, just endears us all to what you're doing, what OS Therapies is trying to accomplish. And I know I speak for everyone who's listening to this pod with the Olivia story and the whole thing, that we are just rooting for you. We're rooting for you personally, but also for the patients, because I know that's your main mission. So thanks so much for sharing your leadership insights with us and taking the time to be on the Pharmaverse.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Well, we have many more amazing leaders lined up for you, so please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single one. But that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on the Pharma. Thanks for joining us on the Pharmaverse podcast. Make sure you subscribe below so you don't miss any leadership insights. Like and comment. I would love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next episode of Pharmaverse.